Morning, everybody. And I decided not to present to you, but to open a conversation. So firstly, how wonderful to be here and see all these faces, quite a few of whom I recognize, but in the knowledge of the really remarkable work that you do. So before we talk about amplifying, I think it's really important to also acknowledge the depth of what is being done right now. The care, the support, the psychological safety that is being provided for young people in the after-school sector, the contribution to their creative sparks, to their sporting talents, the augmentation of the learning that's happening in the classroom, the compensating for sometimes broken systems, sometimes broken homes. All of this takes enormous empathy and emotional energy in the engagement, because in every engagement, young people and children are taking because they need. They're taking from the experience all kinds of things that strengthen them, that build them, that make them feel more whole. But in that process, and this is the purpose, you are giving, you are wanting them to take, but at the same time, it is a process of giving that is also take something from you. And it takes enormous resilience to keep going, to keep emotionally strong, to recognize your power in shaping the lives that you're interacting with, and to keep that commitment going. So we're going to talk about amplifying, but let's just start with a big round of applause for your courage, your dedication, and the impacts that you're making. So a round of applause. You know, it's such a cliche, it's such a truism that the youth are the future, and when we build the youth of today, we're building the future. The fact that it's a truism doesn't mean it isn't true. It's true. What we reflect on less is that when we fail children, and when we fail the youth, we are building a failed society. That is the legacy we get when we fail children and the youth. When we fail to address the broken systems that children and young people are navigating, what we are building, what we are leaving as our societal legacy is a broken society. And it baffles me that this truth is not more clearly understood, and that we have to struggle to resource and support the kind of work that is being done at the scale that it needs to be done. Because right now, too often, we are failing the children and failing the youth. And what you are doing is having impacts at the scale that you're able to achieve it. But what we need is to amplify that. What we need is that every school, every community, every child, every young person has systems of support available to them. And the after-school context is one part of that. It's obviously not the only form of support that needs to be provided, but it is a very important part of the architecture of support. So when we're talking about amplifying, I think there are a number of different dimensions of amplification. Partly it's about deepening and layering the dimensions of your work. And you in this room are the experts on that, and I'm not going to talk to you about what is entailed there. But another dimension of amplification is about building the systems for scale, building the institutional architecture, building the organizational capacity. Because too often we end up doing this kind of work on a project basis, funded on short-term basis, high levels of insecurity for those involved. We are failing to institutionalize the systems that can support the sector, that can support this kind of work and enable it to scale and therefore to amplify and deepen as well. So today is a bittersweet day. a day after the budget. It's more bitter than sweet, frankly. In terms of many of the programs that support the kind of work that you're doing, some have survived and some have not survived this budget. So the Social Employment Fund, National Youth Service, and our creative sector stimulus have survived. With another one-year allocation. Oh my God, are we tired of these one-year allocations? There's a context to this, which is that these programs started in the context of COVID. NYS actually started before, but it got a boost in funding as part of the strategy in response to COVID. And so these programs were seen as emergency programs. In the context of the COVID pandemic, we had a jobs bloodbath. And so there was a degree of what I would call policy panic and an agreement that we needed a mass employment strategy. And the presidential employment stimulus was established and given quite significant resourcing. But since then, it has been a struggle to sustain that because the argument has been this was an emergency program and we're no longer in an emergency. And our response has been to say, but unemployment is still a crisis. And what the crisis of COVID did was give us the opportunity to demonstrate what we can do at scale, and that we can do it at scale, and that we can deliver high-quality outcomes that are transformative in the lives of young people and in communities. And that is what we need to be doing, and that is what we need to be doing more of. And so no, now is not the time to scale down these programs. But they have been scaled down. From a budget of 12 billion in the context of COVID, we're now down to 4. And in the budget yesterday, there was no allocation for the schools program. Now, when we had the 4-minute encounter, I met with Ntombi, and she said to me she's from Nelson Mandela Bay Education Department. I said, I'm from the employment stimulus. And she said, yes, when are we getting more education assistance? And I had to say, I'm so sorry to break the news. We didn't get a budget allocation in the budget yesterday. So yes, the single biggest youth employment program in South Africa's history, employing 200,000 young people a year in the schools, has not got an allocation. We may overcome this. It's the third year, in fact, that this has been the case. We did manage to get funding from the UIF Reserve Fund, but we did lose a year in the process. It took a year to put the institutional arrangements in place, and we may be able to overcome this, and the BEI may still be back. But nevertheless, it represents a bit of a blow. Because what we actually want to see is the fact that a program that has shown its ability to impact gets fiscal support to institutionalize and gets a 3-year runway so that we can do proper planning. We can do proper planning and procurement for training, for proper exit strategies and all the good things that go when there's a degree of security of funding. So I'm bringing you most of you already know this news from yesterday, but as I say, it's good news and bad news. That's the immediate practical context, but I want to step back from that to talk a bit more conceptually about the importance of all of this. I was asked to talk about social employment, and that's the branding for the Social Employment Fund, but I want to broaden it a bit to really reflect on all forms of publicly funded or socially funded employment and why they matter so much. And I want to take us back to the social contract. A very fundamental part of what keeps societies together. Societies are kept together by all kinds of rules and agreements that vary over history and time and in different contexts. But one of the things that is pretty universal in pretty much all societies is this. A society looks after its people, and its people must contribute to that goal. That is why children must be supported, but part of the transition to adulthood is understood as being the onus shifts, and now you contribute. And you contribute to the support of the kids, and you contribute to the support of the sick, people who can't support themselves, people who've made their contribution and are now getting old. That's how societies work. That is what a society is. It is a group of people that look after each other. Now, how do we contribute? We contribute by doing work. Work of all kinds, paid and unpaid work, but the means of contribution to society is through what we do, what we build, what we grow, how we care, how we... Contributing to society is work. But work has become diminished in certain ways to employment and to an economic transaction. And the social dimension of the transaction is often missing in the conversation. So that in our context of unemployment, if your labor doesn't have a market value, if you're unemployed, that's the definition of unemployed. You can't sell your labor. Nobody's buying your labor. You're unemployed. If you can't sell your labor, you're seen to have no value. You feel that you have no value. You feel that you are not contributing to your society. It's so interesting. All of you in this room will know this. When we interview participants in these programs, time and time again, you say, what does this mean to you? And people say, I'm a contributing member of my household. I'm contributing to my family. I'm contributing. It's so deeply socialized that this is what is expected of us as whole adults, is that we contribute. That's how we transition from childhood. We become contributing members of society. So what happens when the society fails its side of the bargain? And that's what we have right now. We have society failing its side of the bargain. Because if part of that social contract is that we must all contribute willingly, and we do, society must make it possible for everyone to contribute to that society. And the key point here is that even if our labor has no market value, it has social value. And it can create social value. And it can create economic and environmental value too. And so what we need are instruments that unlock the social value of labor. And that's what public employment programs are. They are a public instrument, a social instrument that enables us to unlock the social value of labor when markets can't do so, when people are unable to participate economically, when their labor has no market value. We have to ensure that its social value is recognized. And so these programs are not just some nice to have, some relief add-on. I can talk about all kinds of dimensions of why these programs matter. They contribute economically. There was a lovely quote, actually, from the CFO of the IDC, as it happens, who said, businesses thrive when communities thrive. And that link is also often not understood. You know, people say to us, oh no, we can't invest in these programs, we must invest in economic growth. Please. How do you think local economies grow? Local economies grow when communities thrive. Local economies grow when people have money in their pockets to spend at that local entrepreneur. That's how local economies grow. And in our highly unequal economy, the reason local economies can't grow is because of inequality. Inequality and poverty are what are shackling the growth potential in local economies. It's not, you know, anyway, I'll stop there. The point is, as a society, we need to recognize that part of the social contract means, yes, we expect people to contribute to the society, but the quid pro quo for that is that we must create the opportunities and instruments for people to do so, even when the economy is failing the society, as our economy is doing right now. But right now, so public employment, social employment, publicly funded employment, socially resourced employment, forms of employment that close the gap when market-based opportunities don't exist at the scale of social need. That's what these programs are. That's what these programs do. Now, back to the theme of amplification. Right now, these programs are actually, if you analyze the budget, we are on a downward trajectory. We are certainly not being amplified. And that is despite, I would argue, enormous evidence of impact and of the social relevance and the social importance of these programs. Many of these programs are what stand between a future of failure. I said at the beginning, when we fail our kids, when we fail the youth, what we're building is a failed society. And many of these programs are what are holding that space in our communities and in our societies and preventing that kind of systemic failure. And so we need to support them, but we need to make the case for that. And so amplification has to also be, we have to amplify our impacts, we have to deepen, we have to scale, but we also have to amplify our voice on this. If the society values these programs, let's hear it. In a way, this morning, I found it quite sobering how little was said in the public domain about the lack of support for these programs. We need to strengthen our voice. We need to amplify our voice. Let me be blunt here. From the President's office, I'm not the one going to the press conference saying, I'm not happy with this budget. That's not going to happen. Don't quote me on that. The point is, though, if the society values these programs, the society has to defend them. And that means finding ways to be heard, finding ways to articulate the importance, and finding ways to build the community and social momentum that makes the case that society has a responsibility to enable the economic inclusion of all of its people. And I can see that my time's coming to an end, so I will. I thought you were getting up to, you know how the facilitators sometimes kind of get up and start standing nearer and nearer to you, and it's time for you to stop. But actually, that is pretty much the end note here. I think that we have to look at new ways of motivating for support for these programs because we want them institutionalized. We don't want this one year, stop-start funding. It's utterly demoralizing. It doesn't allow organizations to build the capabilities and capacities and systems and processes that are needed. It doesn't allow us to deepen the impacts. It doesn't allow us proper planning runways to deliver effectively. So we're set up for failure. And then we're told, well, you didn't achieve the impacts that were expected. Well, if you're set up for failure, then that is the risk. So what we need is to institutionalize the support for these programs, to amplify it, and to do that, we do need to raise our voices further. We also, I think, have to start getting smarter about other resourcing strategies. Yes, in the end, the fiscus is the main source of systemic level funding in a society and should be held accountable for that. But there are actually significant areas of resource that we need to perhaps get better at laying claim to. So that is the challenge that I'm going to leave you with. Thanks very much.